Hello, everybody. My name is Roger O'Sullivan, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar today entitled Healthy Brains for Healthy Populations. As a society, we're living longer than ever before. And what the goal we all strive for is for healthier, more active lives. This event shines a light on what is brain health, why is it important, and what we can do to keep our brains healthier for longer. This is an interactive event, so please remember to submit your questions using the chat function, and you can also tweet about the event using the hashtag #ThinkPublicHealth. We're going to start off now, before we have our presentation from Claire, we're going to start off with 2 poll questions. So Adam, can you please share the first question on the screen? So, how often do you think about your own brain health? Never, sometimes, often. Can you please vote now? Okay. So Adam, do you want to share the results? So 9% never think about their brain health. Nearly 60% sometimes, and a third think about their brain health often. So Claire, this will be useful for you to consider. So Adam, can you share the next question? Okay, so the question that's coming up is, do you think dementia is a natural consequence of aging? Yes or no? Okay. So Adam, do you want to share the results? So what you can see now is 17% say yes, and 83% say no. So thank you everybody for taking part. So again, I encourage you to submit your questions. There'll be a Q&A session. We've had a number of questions submitted already. If you want to tweet, use the hashtag #ThinkPublicHealth. So now I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Claire McEvoy, a dietitian and lecturer at Queen's University Belfast, with her research with a particular focus on nutrition and lifestyle in healthy aging, and a special interest in brain health. So Claire, I'm delighted for you to present here today. So look forward to this. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Roger, and thanks so much for the really lovely introduction. I'm going to attempt to share my slides now, so just let me get them up. Okay, Roger, can you let me know if you can see my slides okay?
Yes, I can see your slides.
Fantastic. Okay, hi everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today. And I do want to say a big thank you to Roger and the Institute of Public Health in Ireland for hosting this webinar. It's a really important topic area, healthy brains for healthy populations. And I think in the past year, brain health has been really brought more into the spotlight, and it's really interesting to see the poll results today that over 90% of people on the call today are thinking about their brain health at least some of the time. So I am going to, it's a short webinar. It is a big topic area. So if there's anything that I don't cover today that you're particularly interested in, and you want to query or ask me any questions afterwards, please feel free to contact me. And I've put my email address on the slide here, and I would love to hear from you. So,
sorry, hi there, sorry, it's Adam here. I think you're in presenter mode, so we can see your notes.
Oh, right.
If you can just change that back into full.
Sure. Okay. Let me just give you, let me see. Let me just take this down. Okay.
So you'll need to share a screen again as well.
So Adam, can you see my full screen?
Great, yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about today are three key things. Talk a little bit about the importance of brain health and really think about the context of dementia from the Irish perspective. I'm going to review what we know from the research evidence about the potential for dementia prevention at a population level. And then I'm going to think about, and talk about some of the things that we can do now as individuals to keep our brains fit and healthy. So our brain is absolutely incredible. It is the most important organ in our body, and the brain controls what we think and feel, how we learn and remember, and the way that we move and talk. But it also controls things that we're less aware of, like the way we digest our food. So brain health impacts every aspect of our lives, from our physical health and functioning, our emotional health, our relationships with others, and how we perform in our jobs and in our lives. So brain health is really critical for overall health and well-being. Our brains are like supercomputers. They work non-stop for us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for our whole entire lives. So it's really important that we do take care of them. And what's really interesting and has emerged in the past number of years is neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change and grow. Doesn't just stop in childhood and adolescence, it actually continues throughout a person's lifetime. And we used to think that brain health was really predetermined by our genetic makeup, but we're now understanding that lifestyle choices can really have a profound influence in the way our brains grow and change throughout the course of our life. Now, dementia, you probably are all aware of, is an umbrella term for a range of conditions that cause irreversible damage to the brain, and it affects memory and thinking functions, as well as the ability to carry out everyday tasks. In our population, dementia is a leading cause of disability, of loss of independence, and also death. It affects approximately 86,000 people across the island of Ireland, and we expect to see these figures double in the next 20 years, largely because our population is aging, we're living longer, and we don't have effective strategies to prevent dementia in our population at the moment. We know that dementia doesn't just affect the person, it affects families, it affects the provision of care services, and it is a very costly condition in terms of socioeconomic costs. So these are estimated to rise to over 200 billion, also with the increasing number of future dementia cases in our population. There are different types of dementia, but Alzheimer's disease, which is caused by the buildup of abnormal amyloid and tau proteins in the brain, is the main form of dementia, and also then vascular dementia, which is caused by a disrupted blood flow to the brain, for example, a blood clot, are the most common types of dementia, as the second most common type of dementia in our population. As I said, there's no cure for dementia, so we really do need to think about ways in which we can slow the progression of cognitive decline and delay or prevent dementia in our population. I think that's one of the most important public health priorities facing Ireland today. So what is the potential then for dementia prevention? So as I said, you know, we used to think that it really our genes and, you know, our age were the main determinants of dementia in later life. But we now have a lot of evidence that's been accumulating over the past 15 years from long-term epidemiological studies that gives us reason to be really optimistic about dementia prevention. So it's shown us that there are a lot of different risk factors that are modifiable across the life course. And these factors, including cardiometabolic risk factors like hypertension, obesity, diabetes, as well as lifestyle behaviors like unhealthy diet, heavy alcohol consumption and smoking. These all interact across the life course to influence the risk of dementia in later life. So there is good reason also to be optimistic because we also have protective factors against cognitive decline. So engaging in an active lifestyle, having regular physical activity and engaging in cognitive and social activities is thought to be protective against dementia in later life. It's really also important to know that dementia just doesn't happen overnight. The changes in the brain that cause accelerated cognitive decline are likely to happen maybe 1 to 2 decades, even maybe more than that, before even the mild symptoms of cognitive impairment become apparent. So we really are starting to think about, you know, we need to intervene more at an earlier stage in life, in the life cycle, to have any impact on dementia in later life. And maybe around midlife is a good time to start really thinking about addressing these, particularly these cardiometabolic risk factors. So the question is, what extent can we prevent dementia in our population? And this was the subject of a recent expert committee it's called the Lancet Commission on Dementia Prevention. And they reviewed all of the evidence for modifiable risk factors that can be targeted at a population level to reduce the risk of dementia. And of course, some of these risk factors are some that we've already mentioned, like midlife hypertension and obesity, diabetes, physical inactivity, smoking, low education, heavy alcohol consumption, social isolation, and depression. But there are 3 new risk factors that might be surprising to you. The first is hearing loss. The second is traumatic brain injury. And the third is air pollution. And of course, we can, you know, tackle all of these at a population level. So altogether, the estimated proportion of preventable cases of dementia, if we address all of these modifiable risk factors, is estimated at around 40%, which is a huge number. So we still don't fully understand the mechanisms for many of these risk factors. And in the future, we might see some of these estimated risks change and other modifiable factors added as the research evidence base continues to grow. But I think we have enough now really to start thinking about strategies to improve brain health across the life course. So what can we do to keep our brains fit and healthy? So the brain needs certain conditions in order for the brain cells or the neurons to work optimally. So these are very broad conditions and include adequate delivery of oxygen and nutrients to the brain. So a really good blood supply. We need a really effective and efficient waste removal system to avoid these toxins and waste products building up in the brain. And that can be facilitated by a low level of inflammation. And then also what we know is really important is that the brain needs stimulation in order to build new connections with other neurons and also to repair networks that may become damaged. So what can we do then? Well, the first thing is eat a healthy diet. So there are many studies that have investigated the potential neuroprotective properties of different nutrients that we consume. So things like antioxidant vitamins, B vitamins, and omega-3 fatty acids, which are mainly found in oily fish. But we're now beginning to learn that it's likely that it's the combination of foods as we consume them in an overall dietary pattern that's likely to have greater protection against cognitive decline. And this you may recognize is the Mediterranean diet. So this is a traditional plant-based diet. It's very nutrient dense, so it's very high in fruit and vegetables, whole grains, and olive oil. It has a moderate intake of fish and low-fat dairy, and also alcohol, which is generally taken in the form of wine with meals. And it has a fairly low intake of processed food in general, and also red meat, which is typically only consumed about once a week. Now, the interesting thing is that the Mediterranean diet has proven cardiovascular benefits, and it's also anti-inflammatory. And there's also, and then in this way, it may also provide the brain with protection against neurodegenerative processes. So there have been a number of prospective studies that have investigated Mediterranean diet in relation to cognitive impairment, to Alzheimer's disease, and also to all-cause dementia. And when we pull all of the findings of the research together, we can see that higher adherence to a Mediterranean diet is associated with around 21% reduced risk of developing a cognitive impairment. The greatest pooled or the strongest pooled risk estimate is for Alzheimer's disease. So you can see the higher Mediterranean diet score is associated with around 40% reduced risk of Alzheimer's disease relative to a low adherence to a Mediterranean diet score. Now, most of this research is conducted in older adults. And you will know that, you know, food is essential and we do eat across our life course, but we know very little about early life dietary exposures in relation to cognitive or brain health. And this is some work that we did a couple of years ago. We published investigating dietary patterns, including the Mediterranean diet during adulthood and cognitive performance at midlife in 2,600 adults who were around 25 years of age to begin with at baseline, and then they were followed up for 30 years. And what we saw was that those participants who had a moderate or a high adherence to a Mediterranean diet had less decline over 5 years in their cognitive function compared to those who had low adherence to a Mediterranean diet. And this is even when we adjusted our analyses for things like education, socioeconomic status, and cardiovascular risk factors. So Mediterranean diet can be helpful to preserve cognitive function, not just in older age, but also at midlife. The second thing we can do is to get regular exercise. And there have been a lot of studies that have been published. Again, these results of the individual studies have been pulled together. And what we can see is that higher levels of physical activity are associated with a reduced risk of cognitive decline and dementia. It's thought that aerobic exercise is most beneficial. Now, that doesn't mean we have to, start going to the gym and, getting onto the treadmill. Aerobic exercise can be anything from gardening to walking to, vacuuming the house. It's something that gets our heart going a little bit quicker and a little bit of sweat building up. And that type of exercise is thought to be beneficial for brain health. Why? Well, we know that it improves cardiometabolic risk factors. So it reduces insulin resistance, it helps improve our blood glucose levels, and it helps reduce things like blood pressure, and keeps our weight under control. And these factors also help with brain health. But actually, the interesting thing about exercise is that it might also have a direct effect on our brains. So it can, there is some evidence to suggest that exercise can enhance new brain cell formation in the hippocampus. Now, the hippocampus is where a really important part of the brain that's involved in memory formation, and it's also a part of the brain that's really vulnerable to Alzheimer's disease. So exercise may be very important to protect against cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease in later life. So what about, from the Irish perspective? Well, this is a study that was conducted in the longitudinal aging study in Ireland called TILDA, and many of you will be aware of this study. But this analysis looked at sedentary behaviours and cognitive function in adults aged 50 years and over. And one of the main findings from this study is that older people, 65 years and over, who watched a lot of TV, so more than 3.5 hours a day, had greater 2-year decline in verbal fluency compared with those who watched less than 1.5 hours per day. And this is in line with other studies that have shown negative associations between TV viewing and cognition in both middle and older age. So, you might think that TV viewing, well, it is educational and it could be potentially cognitive stimulate our brains. But actually, it's thought, the research is shown that more mentally active sedentary activities, like being at the computer or reading or doing some puzzles, were associated with better mental and cognitive health outcomes compared with a more passive sedentary behavior like watching TV. So it's this, the third thing is to be cognitively and socially active, and it's down to this concept about using it or losing it. So keeping our mind active helps to maintain learning, remembering and thinking skills. And the key thing here is to remember is that to try something new, to be challenging your brain health. So if you do crossword puzzles and you've been doing them your whole life, that is not necessarily going to continue to stimulate your brain connections. What you need to do is maybe think about a new activity, something like, taking up a language or learning a musical instrument or doing a different type of puzzle. And this sort of different type of cognitive activities, they stimulate new connections in the brain and can help to build cognitive reserve. So this sort of resilience against the effects of diseases or waste products that build up in the brain and can cause cognitive decline over time. There's also some evidence to suggest that people who are socially active are less likely to develop dementia. And of course, we don't really know, how that actually works, or, does greater social engagement keep our brains healthy? Or is it that having a healthy brain results in better social engagement? So we're still not really sure what direction that association takes. But at this point, we're thinking that if you are going to do something positive for your brain health, do something cognitively challenging, but maybe do it as part of a group-based activity or with a friend, and that you have that social engagement aspect as well. Now, the other thing that we are learning is that dementia is really a very complex and multifactorial disease, and it's likely that if we need multiple lifestyle strategies really to protect against cognitive decline. So combining all of these strategies together. And this is one of the first large, longer-term, multi-domain intervention trials on cognition. So this is the FINGER study. It was conducted in Finland, where they recruited a total of 1,260 participants who were at high dementia risk, but didn't have any cognitive impairment. And they were aged between 60 and 77 years. And they were randomized to a 2-year multi-component intervention. So that consisted of healthy diet, an exercise program. There was a cognitive and social activities program as well as, and then optimization of vascular risk factor profile. Or else participants were allocated to the control group, which would just provide it with healthy, general healthy advice. So let's look at the results of the FINGER study after the 2-year intervention period. So this is a summary of the primary findings of FINGER, and so we can see here cognitive function against time, which is over the 12-month period. In the red, we can see the intervention group. In the blue, we see the control group. And really what these results tell us is that people who followed the intervention had significantly less decline in their overall cognitive function when compared to those in the control group. And the authors of the study looked at other domains of cognitive function. So they looked at executive function, they looked at processing speed, and they also looked at complex memory tasks. And they found that in each of these domains of cognitive function, people in the intervention group had better cognitive functions than people in the control group after 2 years. So the overall conclusions of the study was that this multi-domain intervention resulted in a lower risk of cognitive decline over 2 years, but there were also broader health effects. So people in the intervention group saw 30% lower risk of functional decline, and also they reported better health-related quality of life compared to those in the intervention group. So these sorts of multi-domain lifestyle interventions can really have broad and lasting effects on health, not just brain health, but our physical health as well, and our mental health. And there is an extended follow-up period for the FINGER study, where they're actually going to assess the effect of the FINGER intervention on the incidence of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. So that will be, that's ongoing, and those results will be awaited with anticipation in the future. We still have lots to learn, and there are larger global collaborations that are testing different variations of diet and lifestyle interventions for cognitive aging. So one initiative is the worldwide FINGERS network of multi-domain trials for dementia risk reduction. And this now includes over 30 countries worldwide. And the idea of this large network is to allow shared learning and data harmonization in order to test and adapt the FINGER trial model in different settings and across different populations, so that we can really define more effective and also feasible preventative strategies for people with different risk profiles. So some of the main questions are, can the FINGER study be replicated in other populations? We know that the intervention was very, very intensive. So can people in Ireland, for example, make all of these changes to their diet, exercise, and cognitive and social stimulation? And is it feasible? The second question is around what are the necessary and optimal doses to include in these multi-component interventions? So Again, do we need to have such a high level intensity intervention, or can reduced intensity interventions have the same effects? And can they be delivered using low cost and scalable approaches? And of course, these are the things that we need to think about in public health. The finger intervention was delivered with health professionals, and that would be very costly to roll out to our population level. So I can tell you in Ireland, we are conducting the brain diabetes trial, and this is a cross-border feasibility trial to evaluate a culturally tailored adaptation of the finger study among older people with type 2 diabetes that are living in rural border areas of Ireland. So our catchment areas are Sligo and Leitrim, and Tyrone and Fermanagh in the north. And we're recruiting 140 people with type 2 diabetes, and we will allocate them to the intervention, which is based on the finger study. So it combines brain healthy diet, exercise program, and also a cognitive stimulation program. We also have built in some optimization of vascular and metabolic health factors into the intervention arm, or the subjects will be allocated to the control group, and they'll just receive some healthy lifestyle information. And all of our interventions for brain diabetes will be delivered remotely rather than face-to-face. So potentially it has the potential to be a low-cost intervention. And what we are assessing in the study is whether people can make the necessary behavior changes and whether they find the intervention acceptable and engage in it. But we're also measuring some health outcomes, including cognitive function, a measure of glucose level and glucose control, and also cardiovascular risk factors and quality of life. So that study is beginning to recruit next month, and the results should be available in 2023. So I think hopefully I've convinced you that dementia presents one of the biggest social care challenges that are facing our population today. And I think if we are to have a tangible impact on dementia in our population, then we need to reframe dementia as more of a complex and multifactorial condition with greater emphasis on primary prevention using a public health-based approach. And whilst there are a lot of research gaps, we do have a mounting and growing evidence base that provide opportunities for us to consider national policy relevant to promoting brain health and dementia risk reduction. I think we do need to understand more about the social determinants of dementia risk. Of course, a lot of the risk factors like low education and cardiovascular risk factors, they do follow a social gradient. So we need to understand more about those broader social determinants of dementia risk and identify subgroups of our population who are at greatest risk, and so that we can give them access to the support and information that they need to adopt a more brain healthy lifestyle. I think really importantly, we know globally that there is a very low awareness of dementia risk factors at a population level. So we need to understand, what is the awareness in our own population of modifiable risks for brain health? And we need to understand, what are the barriers and enablers to behavior change towards adopting a more brain healthy lifestyle in our population. And at the moment, we have a survey that aims to sort of generate information on knowledge and awareness of brain health in our population, and also on brain healthy behaviours. So if you are 40 years and above and you live in the north or south of Ireland, and indeed Scotland, you can go on to this using this link or scan this QR code using the camera on your phone, and it'll take you to the brain health survey, and it'll take about 20 minutes to complete. So Rebecca Townsend, who is working with me at Queen's, is leading this survey, and we have working with partners in the Institute of Public Health, in the Global Brain Health Institute at Trinity College, also with Age NI and Brain Health Scotland. And we're planning also to roll this survey out into England and Wales in the next month or so. So this will generate some data that gives us an understanding of how we can more target interventions for brain health that are more relevant to our population. So on that note, I just want to thank I work with a lot of super people, and there are too many to mention, but I just want to thank all of the collaborators and my mentors, and also some of the funders for the work that I've presented today. And with that, I think there are some time for questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. That's been a brilliant presentation. You've covered a lot. So we have a number of quick fire questions. We have a lot of questions to go through. The first one is, what age should we start thinking about brain health? So, and I'll ask you to be brief because we have so many different questions. People can maybe follow up with you afterwards if they want to in more detail. So what age should we start thinking about brain health?
Okay, well, the short answer to that is it's never too early to start, or it's never too late to start. So our brain health in terms of childhood and adolescence, of course, our brains are growing and developing. So good nutrition and a good quality education is really important. We know that our brains begin to age when we're in our 30s, and also some of these brain changes that are associated with developing dementia can start to begin in midlife. So it's at that point we really need to address some of these risk factors for dementia prevention at a personal level. And then we also know this concept of neuroplasticity, that people can grow, their brains can grow and learn new things no matter what age we are. And we know that in older age, that this is possible, and you can build cognitive reserve and new connections in the brain by taking up new hobbies, having a very active lifestyle, and getting regular physical activity and also cognitive and social activities. So yes, it's never too early or too late to start thinking about your brain health and doing something about it.
Okay, so we have a question about sleep. Does sleep affect brain health?
Yes, I didn't mention sleep today because it's not an established risk factor yet, but there's a lot of excitement about sleep, and there's a lot of research that's happening in this area. So we know that people with dementia have disturbed sleep patterns, and very often even the sleep pattern can be reversed so that people are with dementia may be awake more during the night and sleeping more during the day. And we think that's because there's increased, amyloid accumulating in the brain. Also interesting that if we take mice in the lab and we disrupt their sleep pattern, amyloid starts building up in their brains. So we think sleep is really important for this sort of effective waste removal of toxins and these abnormal proteins from the brain. And we spend about 1/3 of our lives sleeping. So we think sleep and deep sleep and having a good night's sleep is really important to have that effective waste removal system. Now, we published a study. There's lots of people who have problems with disturbed sleep in the general population. And I published a study with some colleagues at UCSF, Hugh A. Lang and Christine Yaffe, where we reviewed, we did a review on involving more than 4 million participants. And what we found that people with sleep disordered breathing, in other words, sleep apnea, had around 26% increased risk of developing a cognitive impairment compared to those without sleep disordered breathing. But what we don't know is, if we intervene to improve sleep, will it help our, reduce dementia in the future? And that is subject to research at the moment. But I think it's very exciting, and there's a lot of rationale about why we should be studying sleep, and why we should be getting a good 7 to 8 hours sleep a night.
Okay, great. I'm going to join a few questions together in this one. Any evidence around mindfulness, yoga? I'll add cold water swimming in terms of supporting your brain health.
Yeah, I mean, all of these, I did mention that in terms of activity levels, the strength of evidence is around aerobic exercise, but there is some interest in, stretching, toning, and also yoga as a, with the breathing and the reduction in stress levels as well. And I think all of these things that have more holistic effects that can cover some of the more physical activity, but also allow us to help reduce our stress levels, can be very helpful for brain health. But the research just is not there yet. But there are some studies going on, particularly for yoga.
Okay, so we've got a question in now from a physiotherapist who is working with people with Down syndrome, and they were wondering if you have any specific information or advice with regard to brain health for that particular group.
Yeah, that's a really interesting area. And as I said in the talk today, there are subgroups of our population that may be more at risk of brain health and, are relatively understudied. So we don't know an awful lot about potential for dementia prevention. And Down syndrome is one such population. So we know people with Down syndrome are at increased risk of a type of Alzheimer's disease, largely because the chromosome 21 that's unique to Down syndrome also carries a gene that can increase amyloid in the brain. But it's not inevitable. So not everyone with Down syndrome will go on to develop Alzheimer's disease. And I think the figures are around 30% of people with Down syndrome can go on to develop Alzheimer's when they're in their 50s, and it rises to around 50% for people in their 60s. So why doesn't everyone, with Down syndrome go on to develop Alzheimer's? That's the thing we don't understand. And in terms of lifestyle interventions, we know virtually nothing in this population group. There is a small study that showed that people with Down syndrome who engaged in more cognitive and social activities had less decline in their memory function over 3 years compared to those who didn't have such an engaging lifestyle. So I think there are reasons why we should be studying this more. Also, the cardiovascular burden, we know that stroke incidence can be quite high in people with Down syndrome. So there's a lot of reasons why we should be studying this more, but we just don't have the research base at the moment. There's a lot of work ongoing to try and understand more about the biological mechanisms of Alzheimer's disease in Down syndrome, but I think we need also some research on lifestyle factors in relation to brain health in Down syndrome. So I would love to, chat to anyone that's interested in that at a later stage. Yes.
Thanks, Claire. That's a great offer. We have loads of questions coming through, and I know we're coming up now. We've hit our time, so I'm just going to take another few minutes just to ask a few last questions. You mentioned hearing loss as one of the new identified areas. Can you just explain that briefly, the connections with brain health?
So we don't really understand the mechanisms for that, but what we do know that hearing loss is actually a big problem. It affects over a third of people over the age of 55. So it's a huge problem, and it doesn't happen just overnight again. It's a gradual process. The mechanisms we don't know, but it could be something to do with the fact that our auditory parts of the brain are not being stimulated, and they start to break down, and that causes other parts of the brain to overcompensate, which can cause cognitive decline. Also, there is some suggestion that hearing loss can actually can lead on to more social isolation and depression. And of course, those factors as well have been linked to poor brain health. So it could be a whole load of reasons why hearing loss could be linked to brain health. The main thing is, you know, can wearing a hearing aid or correcting hearing loss improve brain health? We don't know. What we do know is that a lot of people who are asked to wear hearing aids don't actually comply with that. So there's a lot of we need to do a lot more work to understand if actually intervening to improve hearing loss protects against dementia in later life, and what are the barriers towards wearing hearing aids in our population.
Okay, that's great. Okay, look, I know this may be outside your area, but it's a question that's come in. Do you think there'll ever be a surgical intervention for dementia? What? Okay.
Well, who knows? I do know that there's no cure for dementia. So once the diagnosis of dementia is made, you know, the brain cells are lost. You can't reverse that process. In terms of vascular dementia, if we intervene, and we do intervene early in that process, maybe to do some carotid angioplasty or stenting that helps to, you know, clear out the clogged arteries leading to our brain, that sort of surgical intervention may actually slow down the progression of cognitive impairment for vascular dementia. But I don't see a surgical or any type of brain surgery being an option for people with dementia.
Okay, thank you. I've really got the last three questions during COVID, we've heard a lot more about brain fog. Maybe could you say briefly, what is it and why is it important?
Yes, we have heard a lot about brain fog during the pandemic. So brain fog, it is a sort of general term. It describes sort of when you're not able to think straight, not able to concentrate, and it actually can affect, you know, the way you interact with people and also your ability to perform in your daily job. So it's not related to dementia. It's usually related to an underlying condition. So for example, a serious medical condition like the coronavirus, or an autoimmune condition, or it could be to do with hormonal imbalances. It could even be like, for example, during pregnancy or menopause, could be a nutritional deficiency, particularly B12 deficiency, or it could be even caused by some over-the-counter medications like, you know, antihistamines. So there could be a whole variety of reasons why somebody might be experiencing these symptoms of brain fog, but they can be short-lived for a lot of people, but they can actually last for a longer period of time and be more persistent for others. And it can be very debilitating. It can really affect a person's quality of life. And what can we do about brain fog? Well, I think the main thing to think about is not to, you know, try and multitask and do a lot of things at once. The main thing is to think about setting small goals to complete. You know, it could be everyday tasks like loading the dishwasher or making a shopping list, or just small tasks that you can build on over time and actually completing those tasks. Secondly, even if you're feeling mentally and physically fatigued, try and get out and get some physical exercise. We know that exercise really helps us feel better and helps with mental clarity. So getting regular exercise, like we talked about earlier, getting a good night's sleep, really important for trying to combat some of these feelings of brain fog. And when we think about our diet, you know, refined carbohydrate like sugar and processed food, these sorts of things make us feel really sluggish. And if we start to try and make some changes to our diet to improve the overall quality, to maybe concentrate more of natural home cooked foods rather than processed foods, I think that can make a huge difference as well.
Okay, Claire, the very last question. Who should I talk to if I'm concerned about my brain health?
Well, I think in the first instance, if you have a genuine concern about brain health, you do need to speak to your healthcare provider, and they can advise you on whether you need to go for further testing of your brain functions, or whether you know, it's something that can easily be treated, like as we said with the brain fog, maybe an underlying condition, or maybe a nutritional deficiency, or maybe thinking about depression and our emotional health as well. So I think in the first instance, friends, family, and your healthcare provider would all be sort of people to speak to about brain health.
Claire, that's been brilliant. You've been really generous with your time. You've taken those quick fire questions and given really brilliant answers. We have so many more questions that came through that I wasn't able to get to. So thank you for such an excellent presentation and a great Q&A. I'd like to take this time also to thank the ICT team who've worked behind the scenes to keep us online. Also, Leah, who took care of the comms, Aideen, who's been working in the background, ordering and fielding the questions, and thank you to the 600 people who registered. I hope you found this useful. The presentation or today's event is being recorded, so that will be up on the IPH website for people who are registered for this event. So thank you very much, everybody. It is now, we're a few minutes later than planned, but I hope you found it very worthwhile. Thank you and stay safe.